Howdy my totally as always Tubular Gamers. We are back with, you guessed it, another video. I got a fun one for you. Today we have a ranking video. Yes, it is finally time to do another ranking video, first one of the year. And to kick things off, I thought I would talk about Bethesda. Yes, 2025 is finally going to be the year that I talk about all of the Bethesda games. I may have briefly talked about some of them in the past, but I really want to talk about like every game put out by Bethesda. You all know Bethesda, the mega publisher that is now owned by Microsoft. Yes, they are a developer as well. They did develop Skyrim, Fallout 4, Starfield, etc. But I'm really looking at Bethesda overall, all of the games they've published, all the games they've developed, and everything in between, and they've really put out some stellar titles over the last decade and a half. All of the latest Doom titles, the latest Fallout titles, the entire Elder Scrolls series. There's a lot of good games with the Bethesda banner on them. But we're gonna start small, things are only gonna get bigger and bigger from here. I thought for today's video we would rank all of the Bethesda games that have released in the 2020s so far. It sounds crazy to say, but we are halfway through the 2020s already, and Bethesda, they put out some pretty solid titles. They've released 7 titles in the 2020s, and I'm gonna be ranking all of these from worst to best, giving each one of them a little review, sharing my thoughts, feelings, memories, etc. We're gonna be comparing and contrasting. We're gonna be stacking these games up against each other, which ones are worth playing, which ones are worth avoiding, and hopefully just having a chill time. I will not be looking at any remasters for this list, so no Doom 64 remastered, no Quake RTX. We are only looking at new games here. And if you've forgotten what games they released in the 2020s, let me run it back for you. So the games that I'm going to be talking about today are Doom Eternal, Deathloop, Ghostwire Tokyo, Redfall, Starfield, Hi-Fi Rush, and the newly released Indiana Jones and the Great Circle. Yes, I know Doom the Dark Ages is coming out sooner than later and this list will be outdated, but I got a list planned for that game also. And I felt like making this list now that I'm finally done with Indiana Jones. As for all the other Bethesda games that didn't release in the 2020s, don't worry, I'll get to them soon enough, but today it's just going to be the 2020s. So hopefully you understand what games I'm talking about today. If not, you can let me know down below. I'm always lurking down there. Please like, share, comment, subscribe. I got the Patreon and the super thanks. Any support is truly greatly appreciated. Seriously, thank you all so very much. Alright, let's get to the games. So here we have the game Redfall, which is not only one of the worst games that Bethesda has ever had its name attached to, but it really is one of the worst games of the 2020s. I feel like it's somewhat rare when we have a AAA game just miss the mark this hard. Sure, there have been plenty of blunders over the last decade in the AAA space, but Redfall, oh, this game really was just something else. This game really just categorically fails in nearly every aspect, and I'm not just saying that. If you know me, then you know I try to keep things pretty positive, but man, this game really was just awful. So the game takes place in the town of Redfall, a small little town that basically gets overrun by vampires, and it's up to your character to stop them. You get to choose between 4 different characters, and you'll find yourself putting down the vampire leaders. While the premise and world building is decently interesting, especially since we don't have that many vampire games, the actual storytelling is just abysmal. With no memorable characters, moments, or good plot threads. The story is told through these stills, and it's just incredibly uninteresting. I hate to say it, but the narrative, it just straight up sucks. But okay, is the gameplay any better? Well, things are only gonna get worse from here. So the game is a 4-player cooperative first-person looter shooter with some minor immersive sim elements and an open world. Before this game was released, Bethesda and Arcane were claiming that this was an immersive sim similar to, say, the Dishonored series, but I'll just be blunt about this. This is absolutely not an immersive sim, and if it is, it's a terrible immersive sim. But enough about that, let's talk about the structure of the game. So you are dropped into this open world, which is of decent size, and you'll go to the safe houses, and at these safe houses you will get quests. Almost all of the quests are pretty much identical though, where you'll go to the designated area and there'll either be some human enemies or a few vampires to take out. You'll take them all out, you'll go back to the safe house, rinse and repeat. And on occasion you'll solve some very, and I mean very basic puzzles or fight a boss. And as you defeat enemies, complete quests, you level up, you gain some new abilities, and there's some minor RPG elements thrown in there. And so you might be going, well, that doesn't sound like that bad of a structure. It actually sounds really similar to Borderlands. Well, let me tell you where this game just absolutely falls apart. I'll just get into it. The combat is kind of terrible in this game for 2 key reasons: the controls and the feel of the game. It is a first-person shooter. You would hope that the guns and shooting feels nice, but that is not the case here. It feels sluggish. It feels underwater. It doesn't control well. I really thought there was something wrong with my controller or the game. It's not satisfying, there's no real feedback with these weapons, there doesn't seem to be much of an impact, the enemies barely react to you shooting them, and it really is the opposite of feeling nice. You also get some abilities depending on which character you choose, and I just didn't find these abilities all that useful, and they didn't change up the combat all that much. These characters still play pretty similar to each other, and they really don't feel that distinguished from each other. Suicide Squad Kill the Justice League has more distinguished characters than this, and people often criticize that game for the characters feeling too similar. Here, it's like they had all of the abilities for one character figured out, but then instead split all of those abilities across 4. Yeah, they're all very samey and they all control like ass. Something else that doesn't help the combat out is that the AI are just ridiculously stupid in this game. Like, I cannot believe how dumb the AI are in this game. Yes, there have been patches and updates, and the enemies, particularly the vampires, are not as brain dead as they used to be, but the AI really isn't good and it doesn't create engaging, exciting combat. All of it just doesn't really come together at all. The RPG and loot mechanics don't really add anything here either. It is so bland, so generic, and so unbelievably basic that it really doesn't add anything to the game. It is one of the worst loot mechanics I've ever seen in a game. It really doesn't mean anything. They try to throw in a bunch of useless stats and elements, there's rarity colors, but none of that matters. You just pick the weapon with the highest level and you're gonna be fine. It felt like they threw these abilities, RPG elements, and looter shooter stuff in just to be in the game, which is the worst reason why you should have a mechanic in a game. And then when it comes to the open world and quest design itself, it is as bland as it gets. This is one of the lamest open worlds that I've ever seen. There's just nothing going on here. It's not exciting. It feels completely empty. All of the areas pretty much feel the same, and it's all just incredibly lifeless. And then the quest design, like I mentioned, it's pretty basic. You really are just wiping out all of the enemies in an area. Sometimes you destroy something, sometimes you gotta get some loot, but it really doesn't matter. It's all incredibly dull. And dull is the perfect word I would use to describe Redfall. The game is exceptionally dull, with poor combat, a bad open world, with half-baked, no, not even half-baked, quarter-baked abilities and mechanics. The game fails to do seemingly anything right, and when it comes to the presentation and technical state, while it has certainly gotten better than it was at launch, it's still not good. It didn't look good then, and it doesn't look good now, and while the game runs well enough, but unfortunately, it doesn't really matter. This game just doesn't have anything going for it. And it really is a shame with what happened to this game and the studio. After this, the studio would be shut down by Microsoft, and the game's been completely abandoned. I very much do not recommend this game to anybody, and I'm getting sad just thinking about it, so we're gonna move on. So here we have the often forgotten Ghostwire Tokyo. I was actually really excited for this one before it came out, but I feel like here we are a few years later and barely anybody ever talks about this game. The story and premise were actually really interesting in it though. One night everybody was just chilling in Japan when all of a sudden everybody just straight up vanishes. Like straight up. But someone who doesn't vanish is our main character, who gets saved by this spirit detective, who goes by the name of KK, and so it's up to them to figure out what the hell even just happened here. I think the initial premise and setting is actually really interesting, but the story itself, yeah, it was just kind of there. I think the game is a really good hook and start to it, but I feel like it doesn't really follow up on that in the most interesting of ways. And I never thought the story got anywhere near as interesting as like that first hour. There just wasn't a lot of memorable characters, moments, or plot threads here. But you know what I think was done incredibly well is the setting. They did a great job when it came to this game's setting. It absolutely is Tokyo. There's a ton of detail here. Like, this is a really good looking game and it's one of the best recreations of Tokyo I've ever seen. It like rivals Yakuza. I've actually been to Japan and I can tell you that yes, this is a very accurate recreation of it. The game is just incredibly good looking overall. I also think the music and sound effects were quite good in this game. The presentation in general was just very well done. Now when it comes to the actual gameplay, yeah, this is a strange one. I remember before this game came out, it just wasn't super clear what kind of game this actually was. Well, I can absolutely tell you what kind of game it is nowadays. It is a first-person horror action-adventure game that takes place in a large open world. And when I say horror, I more so mean like horror-themed. I wouldn't say that this game is particularly scary. Yeah, it is kind of creepy and maybe even unsettling at times, but it never really scared me, and there's no survival horror elements or anything like that. I will say it is very immersive, thanks to the excellent presentation, great sound design, and if you're playing on PS5, the haptic feedback, which absolutely does add a little bit to the experience. But when it comes to the actual moment-to-moment gameplay here, you're exploring this large open world, getting into combat with these not Slenderman-looking creatures. You'll be exploring around, you'll be collecting ghosts into your little spirit dude, you'll be purifying shrines. There's plenty of open world shenanigans, including side quests and collectibles. At times it can feel a little bit like a Ubisoft game, where the open world is just littered with collectibles, but there are plenty of linear moments and main story quests as well with set pieces. Now, while I didn't find the side quests particularly engaging, actually I found most of them to be pretty generic, the main story missions actually do have a number of good moments, and there's some good combat scenarios. Speaking of the combat, it is very strange. While it is in first person, it is not a first person shooter, at least not in the traditional sense. Instead, you will be using psychic abilities, and you can throw out elements Naruto or Avatar style, where you can throw out wind, water, fire, etc. as you fight these ghosts, spirits, and other weird anomalies. I think the combat is fine in this game, but I feel like it is a bit shallow, especially considering the game's length. There's not a ton of different elements to use, and while you can block, there isn't like a super in-depth satisfying parry mechanic here. You just kind of do enough damage to these things until you basically rip their soul out. And almost all of the encounters really play out the same here. I think the game could have used some more enemy variety. I think the combat in general just could have used a little bit more spice, a bit more sauce to it. There's not enough going on for my liking. Maybe I'm just being a bit hypercritical of it. At least the pacing was pretty good throughout the game, constantly moving you to different parts of the map and mixing things up. And you do get new abilities relatively frequently, but I also was kind of just ignoring a lot of the side content and really all of the collectibles. I could not believe how many collectibles this game has. I have not seen a AAA game in the 2020s with this many collectibles. It is crazy. I'm sure 100% in this game is a total pain in the ass. I'm not even going to think about that, because even just collecting a few of them on the side, I didn't really find this all that engaging. But you know what I can give Ghostwire Tokyo is that this was a really memorable experience. While it does falter in a few areas and I personally have some issues with it, it is absolutely not a game that's going to leave my memory, thanks to just how weird, out there, and generally pretty wacky it is. There's nothing else like it. If you're looking for one of the weirdest AAA games of the 2020s, look no further. This one might be worth checking out. Above all else, I still would recommend the game. So here we have a big one. We have Starfield, which is the only game to be developed by Bethesda and released in the 2020s, and it might be easy to forget now, but there was a lot riding on this game, and I know that the game has a bit of a mixed reception, especially now, but I still think the game was alright. Despite everything, I think there are plenty of good elements to this game, but I also think there are a number of things that hold this game back. And while there have been a number of updates and even a DLC, my thoughts haven't really changed much on Starfield. Something that I've always liked about the game is the story and the setting. It takes place in the far future when we're able to travel all around space, and it sees you playing as just this unimportant miner going about your day, but then you find this mysterious artifact and, well, your life's about to change forever. Your character ends up joining this group known as Constellation, who are basically exploring the deep reaches of outer space and really just trying to figure out what's out there. So yeah, something I've always enjoyed about Starfield is the story. I think the writing is decent, there's some good dialogue here, and I think the world building is actually very well done. There's a lot to this world, it's an interesting place. And there actually were plenty of characters that I did like. I'm not going to act like these are some of the most memorable or best companions of any RPG, but they're not as forgettable and generic as many people will lead you to believe. There are actually some memorable characters here. It's no Baldur's Taint 3, but I think it is still pretty decent. I think the world building, writing, and storytelling are all actually good in Starfield. I don't really got much to complain about there. Could they have taken it in many other directions? Could they have had aliens or other creatures? Could it have been more interesting? Sure, it could have been all of those things, but I'm just looking at what we were presented, and I think what we actually got was well done. But when it comes to actually playing Starfield, it's not all that different from Bethesda's other RPGs. Instead of being dropped into a massive world where you just go off in one random direction and find things, instead it's all spread out across a number of different planets and space. And while you're exploring around one of the main planets, you'll find plenty of things. You'll get quests, whether it's from one of the main factions, it's the story quest where you're looking for the artifact, or it's just some random NPC that is something for you. Quests are something that this game has an abundance of. There's also an abundance of combat. There's some RPG elements where it's more like Skyrim than, say, Fallout. There's all the customization. There's a lot going on with this game. There's plenty of good, but there's also plenty of bad. Let's start with the positives. The first good thing I have to say about the game is that the combat is actually good. It is a first-person shooter and it feels more like Fallout 76 when it comes to the combat, but it's actually pretty good. It's the best combat of any Bethesda RPG easily. The guns are satisfying, they feel nice, there's a bunch of different weapons, there's customization for said weapons, and it just feels nice. Look, is Starfield's combat going to hold up against games like Doom Eternal or the Wolfenstein games? Absolutely not, but those are full-on first-person shooters. That is their focus. Starfield isn't only focused on the shooting, but I think it's actually good here. I did enjoy the combat. I think it's maybe the strongest aspect of Starfield. Plenty of enemies are still spongy as hell though, but generally speaking, I think the combat and the gunplay is actually good, and when you're in the spaceship, it's also pretty decent. It's not amazing, it's not Star Fox. I wish you could do barrel rolls up in here, but it's still satisfying to blow up other ships and take their stuff. Speaking of taking their stuff, I think the scavenging and crafting is also alright here. I wouldn't say it's as good as 76 with all the recipes, but it's fine for what it is. I think the RPG elements are okay. The dialogue system is fixed from Fallout 4, it's much better, it's actually good. And I like all of the checks. Persuasion is good, and the skill trees, they're pretty whatever. I don't think they're super intuitive, and some skills are kind of useless, but most of them are okay. And you can actually have some really different builds. You know, you can actually have a role in the role-playing game. There's different factions to join, and most of the factions are actually interesting and different from each other. When it comes to the role-playing elements, I think they're actually good. They're even better than Fallout 4 and 76 in certain areas. But then we move on to things I don't really like about the game, starting with exploration. The exploration, in my opinion, is just incredibly weak, and it's a shame because that's one of Starfield's major points, exploring the unknown, exploring space, and in my opinion, it really just isn't worth it. I didn't do very much of it. When you're on the major planets, in the major cities, I think the exploration, it's alright. I wouldn't say it's as good as any other Bethesda RPG, but there's actually something interesting to find. When you're on the randomly generated planets or in space, there's really just nothing. It feels like it's just a waste of time. Like, there's resources to get and stuff to scan and the occasional artifact temple, but I just didn't really like these randomly generated planets at all. And space just feels like a complete waste of time. There's really nothing here except some enemies to take out. I just didn't really like the exploration. I also didn't like fast traveling all over the place. I like one big cohesive world that I can explore around, and Starfield doesn't feel cohesive or immersive at all. There's so many loading screens everywhere, so many pauses, it's ridiculous. I expect all of these from Skyrim, shoot, even Fallout 4, but nowadays with our technology, loading screens and pauses all over the place, it's a bit ridiculous, and I'm not a fan of it. I'm also not a fan of the quest design. While I think the characters and the dialogue keep the quests, kind of interesting, the design of the quests, like what you're actually doing in them, I just didn't really care for these. It is almost always a fetch quest. And if it's not, it certainly feels like it. Why does it feel like we've taken steps back from Skyrim and Fallout 4 when it comes to quest design or what you're actually doing in these? It's just not all that interesting. It's always, go get this, go kill this person, come back to me, and that's pretty much all it ever is. There's almost no variety here, and the main quest is just littered with this. The main quest is like the worst quest line in the entire game. All of the faction ones are a bit more interesting, but that main quest, man, it is so boring. Getting those artifacts is just incredibly lame, so the quest design being bad really compounds the issue of exploration not being great. Like, why would I want to go explore anything if I'm going to just go get a quest that's not going to be very good or interesting? The story might be interesting in them, but the actual quests themselves, yeah, not so much. Let's talk about some of the other issues. The user interface just kind of sucks in this game. You spend way too much time in it, and it feels like a third of my game was just spent in the menus. The shipbuilding menu isn't very intuitive or easy to use. In fact, it feels like none of the menus are good. And you'll also spend way too much in the menus because you keep getting over encumbered, and this really just happens way too often in the game. It's really annoying. Navigation can be a real pain in the ass, especially in interior areas. Where are the maps, like in Fallout? The game also has one of the weakest starts to any Bethesda game. Seriously, the first couple hours are not the most enjoyable. The pacing, yeah, it's not great. And you better not forget where those major cities are, because if you forget, well, you're going to have to go to a bunch of planets to figure out where they actually are. The game doesn't really tell you where they are. There's so much fast traveling, and it just doesn't feel cohesive. And you know what else doesn't feel cohesive? All the game-breaking bugs that this game has. While I know that there have been patches, they haven't fixed all of them, and they can be extremely disruptive to your overall experience. I had a bug on the first mission where Barrett couldn't get out of the ship. I had to restart the whole game at the beginning of the game. That's probably the most play-tested area of the the game, come on now. At least to end on a positive note, let's talk about the presentation. I think the game is solid. It does look quite good in some areas and it doesn't look great in other areas, but I think it looks nice. The game had some issues at launch, but it runs a lot better now, and the music, yeah, it's actually pretty good. It kind of wants to be like Fallout 4, but I like it. I actually really like the club music. But look, all in all, when it comes to Starfield, it has some good, it has some bad. While it doesn't hold a candle to other big RPGs from the 2020s like Baldur's Gate 3 or Cyberpunk, I still, for the most part, enjoyed my time with it. I won't lie though, I was a bit disappointed in the end with Starfield. I think it could have been a lot better and a lot more memorable, but the game still is good. If you've played Bethesda games in the past and you enjoyed them, I think you'll like this one. You're not gonna love it like you did with, say, Skyrim, but I think you'll enjoy it at least a little bit. I would recommend it, but I also wouldn't say the game is that much better than mid. And so here we have Deathloop. While I know that there have been plenty of skeptics for this one, I've always enjoyed this game. So what's this game about? Well, it sees you playing as a man named Colt. You wake up on a beach and you don't remember anything, but it turns out it's just like Groundhog Day, where you're living the same day over and over. And you're also being hunted by this mysterious woman named Juliana. Colt naturally wants to get out of this loop, he wants to break the cycle, and the only way he can do that is by killing these 8 visionaries. And the whole game is figuring out how to kill them and what exactly is going on here. I actually like the story to Deathloop. I think the characters are incredibly interesting and well written. I very much like Colt, he's a great protagonist. I think Juliana's great, their dynamic is excellent throughout the entire game. The visionaries are also interesting, the world building was very well done, the pacing is pretty good, the plot threads are good, and I enjoyed it all. The ending is pretty weird though, so I certainly like the story, but when it comes to actually playing the game, it doesn't play all that different from Arcane's previous games like Dishonored, but it is different in a few key areas. It is a first-person shooter immersive sim. And yes, it absolutely is an immersive sim. For almost every objective, there are multiple ways to tackle it. When it comes to the objectives and what you're doing in this game, it is all centered around killing those 8 visionaries. Like from the first few minutes of the game all the way up until the very end, it's all about taking these visionaries out. And we ain't talking about some Olive Garden date or anything, no, I'm talking about bullet to the brain. Or in some cases, a more unconventional way, since yes, this is an immersive sim, but you gotta figure out everything about these targets, figuring out who the visionaries are, what they're doing, where they're going to be, and then the time of day matters as well. It is all just one day, but there's 4 different sections to it: morning, afternoon, evening, and at night. And some visionaries will only be in certain areas at night as opposed to, say, the evening, morning, etc. And Colt has to find a way where he's able to kill all of these visionaries in just one day. There's even a bit of a puzzle aspect to it as well. Most of the game is all of the detective work, learning as much as you can about the visionaries, and there's actually plenty of different ways to learn everything you possibly can about the visionaries. This is very much where it feels like an immersive sim, and I like how many different options there are. And one reason there's so many options is because Colt has a bunch of tools at his disposal. He does have a number of different weapons to use at his disposal. The weapon roster is decent in this game, and while the gunplay isn't amazing, it's more than serviceable. It's a hell of a lot better than Redfall, that's what I'll say. But Colt also has a number of abilities. Some of these feel like they are just straight taken from Dishonored, like Blink, but there are some new ones here that are actually a bit of a game changer. It really allows you to create some divergent gameplay. Colt even gets some other gadgets that can help him along the way and help him be a little stealthier. There is stealth in this game, but I'll be real, it's not very good. It's nowhere near as good as Dishonored, and you can't exactly be non-lethal in a game like this. You'll get into plenty of firefights in this game, but like I said, I think the combat is actually well done for the most part. But what really makes the combat a lot more interesting, what makes this entire game a lot more interesting, is Juliana. Juliana will constantly be hunting you down during the 4 different time frames, and she can pretty much take you out from the moment she has her sights on you. Sometimes you'll be running around and you will get sniped. She really just had the drop on you. While there is always an AI that you can go up against, what makes this game a lot more interesting is when you let real players join you. Some of them are really fucking good, and you'll never make it anywhere in this game, but other times it'll actually be a really engaging firefight that makes the gameplay just overall a lot more interesting. It'll also really keep you on your toes. It might also make you paranoid as all hell though. When it comes to the areas and the level design, there's only a few areas in this game, and while they aren't huge, they are very dense, and there's actually a lot of attention to detail here, and there better be, because you're going to be spending a lot of time in these areas. But I thought the pacing was pretty good in this game. I didn't think it got repetitive until really the end, but that's also kind of the point. you're reliving the same day over and over and you're trying to break that cycle. When it comes to this game's presentation, yeah, it's absolutely on point. It's a good looking game. The character models are good. I like that the game has a little bit of an art style to it, and it feels like it goes for something a little different from most AAA games. Now, while I do like Deathloop, there are a few things I don't really care for in this game. Like I mentioned, the stealth just isn't all that well implemented. The AI isn't very good in this game either. And I'm not just talking about Juliana's AI, I'm talking about all of the artificial intelligence in the game. But what is easily my biggest issue with the game is once you actually figure out how to take out all of the visionaries in one day, it really only seems like there's one way to do it. Maybe there's more than one way to take out all of these visionaries, but I certainly couldn't find another way, and that's a little disappointing. I was expecting it to be more like Hitman or, you know, an immersive sim where you can take all of them out in totally creative ways, but if you want to actually beat the game and take all of the visionaries out in one day, yeah, it really seems like there's only one way to do it, which seems a bit counterintuitive for a game like this, but it's not a deal breaker. I still think Deathloop is a good game. I have absolutely no problem recommending it, and while it might not blow you away like, say, Dishonored did, I still like this one. So here we have Hi-Fi Rush, maybe the greatest shadow drop game of all time. Hi-Fi Rush made a huge splash when it came out, not only because it was shadow drop, but because of how good the game actually was. It was developed by Tango Gameworks, the people who made Evil Within and Ghostwire Tokyo, and it was very, very far off from what they had made in the past, but this is easily their best game and one of the best character action games of the 2020s. So the game sees you play as Chai, this young cool dude who dreams of being a rock star, but he has a disabled right arm, and so he goes to this totally not evil corporation known as Vandalay Technologies to be a test subject for cybernetic limb replacement. But as the process is about to begin, Chai's music player falls onto his chest and basically he gets embedded with music, allowing him to have a musical connection with his surroundings. Because of this, he gets labeled a defect and the corporation goes after him. So it's up to Chai and a bunch of friends he meets along the way to go up against this evil corporation and take him down. When it comes to the story, the characters, the world building, the dialogue, it is fantastic in this game. It is great. Chai is an excellent protagonist. Not only is he cool, but he's likable. He's fun, and he just has a great personality, and I could really say the same about all of the other characters in the game. All of Chai's friends that he eventually teams up with, they're all excellent. They're all incredibly likable, and the villains, they're all really great too, and they've got some great motivation. The writing is solid throughout. The game is actually funny, and it has a good sense of humor. It's not cringe and annoying. The world building is very well done. Like, it's all really great stuff here. And I remember just being kind of surprised with how much I liked the story and characters. Something else that I immediately really liked was how this game looks. I love how this game looks. There is not enough AAA cel-shaded games outside of licensed anime games, but when they do show up, man, it looks amazing. This game, it just absolutely nails this look. I love the colors. It's all incredibly vibrant. The animation, the lighting, the environments, it's all amazing stuff here, and the voice acting is top-notch. The presentation really is fantastic, but when it actually comes to the moment-to-moment gameplay, Hi-Fi Rush is a character action game that is very similar to, say, Devil May Cry. But there is one huge twist. It is a character action rhythm game. Yes, the entire game is played to a beat. Every single level is being played to a beat, and so you're constantly trying to stay to the beat on top of, you know, fighting the enemies, performing combos, dodging them, and just getting around the environment. It makes you wonder how this had not been done yet, because it's a great idea. Mixing a character action game with a rhythm game, oh, it is awesome, and it really does come together in this game. It is a lot of fun. While it might take a few minutes to get used to, or in my case a little bit over an hour since I'm particularly out of tune and rhythm, it will all come together eventually, and when it does, oh, it feels so great. Whooping ass and staying in beat is an immensely satisfying feeling, and the game absolutely will reward you. You'll do more damage, you'll get high combos, and you just feel so cool. While the combat doesn't have the depth or legs that, say, Devil May Cry 3, 4, and 5 have, it still is a whole lot of fun. As you play through the game, Chai learns a bunch of new combos, techniques, and even some of his friends can come help you mid-fight, and it really creates this fun, engaging combat loop that I really couldn't get enough of. On top of this, there's a decent enemy roster, there's different ways to go up against really every enemy, there's plenty of bosses, and the bosses are all really great. I think they really nailed the combat in this game, and it's a good thing they did, because like 80, maybe 90% of the game is combat. When you're not in combat, you're solving some really basic puzzles. There's a little bit of platforming here. There's even a little bit of exploration here, but the game is very linear overall. The game also has a great pace to it, like it is constantly go, go, go. It is all killer, no filler, constantly having you go to new environments, fighting new enemies, new story beat, new set piece, and I found it all to just be incredibly enjoyable. Something else that's incredibly enjoyable is the most obvious thing to bring up. It is a music-based game. You would hope the music is pretty good in this game. Yeah, the music is absolutely fantastic in Hi-Fi Rush. There is a good amount of licensed music, and that is all really great, but the OST is actually really great also. This shit bops, it bangs, it slaps, it fucks, it definitely gets laid. I really do like the soundtrack to Hi-Fi Rush. I just really like this game overall. It's got a good story, some really likable characters, the combat is fun and engaging, it doesn't waste your time, the presentation is excellent. What's there not to like about this game? It's also pretty replayable thanks to the length, and if you can't get enough of the combat, there's even a survival mode once you beat the game. It's just a great game through and through. It was one of the best games of 2023, and I have no problem recommending it to as many people as I possibly can. Even if you kinda like character action games or hack and slash games, I think you're really gonna like this one. But then we have Indiana Jones and the Great Circle. Now, pre-release, I really wasn't too sure about this one. Like, I figured it would be good. Machine Games have made some pretty awesome games, but I didn't think it would be this good. Not only is this the best game made by Machine Games, but this is easily the best Indiana Jones game ever made, and it's what every Indiana Jones game should strive to be going forward. It really is actually that good. I will preface that I love Indiana Jones. Those original 3 movies are amazing, but everything after has just been pretty meh outside of a few decent games. But this is exactly what I think every Indiana Jones fan has been looking for. When it comes to the game's plot, it takes place after Raiders of the Lost Ark, so Indiana isn't old as dirt, he's actually young again, and it sees him going on a globe-trotting adventure about this mysterious Great Circle. And while yes, the name The Great Circle does sound kind of stupid, I can assure you this story is anything but. The plot is actually really great in this game for several reasons. First off, it really actually does feel like a movie. It feels like the older Indiana Jones movies. I'm not speaking in hyperbole here. It's just like those movies, from the way everybody acts, to the way Indiana interacts with the world, the environment, how he mutters to himself, how he talks to the other people, how he talks to the women, how the Nazis, you know, the bad guys act. It very much is in that Indiana Jones vibe. How the story plays out, how the stakes keep getting raised, how all of the cutscenes are shot. It just feels like one of those older Indiana Jones movies. There's also a bunch of little Harrison Ford Indiana nuances and lines that make it in here that are just classic Indiana Jones. It's really great stuff. The writing is excellent, the characters are great, the story's interesting and engaging, and there's a lot of really great world building here. If you're somebody that likes Indiana Jones at all, I think you're really going to enjoy this story and where it goes. I did not expect to like the story this much, but here we are. And when it comes to actually playing the game, oh, it only gets better. I gotta say, I think it's really cool that we have an Indiana Jones game that plays nothing like Tomb Raider or Uncharted. The game actually feels more like an immersive sim than anything else. I wouldn't say it fully goes into the immersive sim category, but it certainly went a lot further than Redfall did. So the game is in first person, but during certain moments it will zoom out and you actually get to see Indiana, who looks great by the way. But for the most part, it is played from a first-person perspective. It'll find you dropped into these semi-open environments where you're given a plethora of missions. Some of them are optional, some of them are not, but they're all actually pretty great. There's a good amount of variety when it comes to these missions. What you'll be doing the most of is exploring around and doing, you know, real archaeological shit. I mean, he is an archaeologist after all. You'll be solving puzzles, investigating areas, piecing clues together, and of course finding artifacts and treasure. But you won't be totally unopposed in these areas. There'll be plenty of Nazis that want to get in your way, and there actually is a good amount of combat in this game. You do of course have your whip, which can be used to disarm enemies or even trip them, but a lot of the fighting in this game is hand to hand. And I'm kind of surprised the hand-to-hand combat actually feels really good. It kind of reminds me of the Riddick games from like 15 plus years ago, but it feels way better than those games. When you're throwing haymakers in this game, it is awesome. It is incredibly satisfying. People go flying, you can parry, and you'll just be knocking fascists out left and right. It's really great stuff. There are plenty of moments where you actually can pull out a gun and you can get into some firefights, but man, if you get shot even like a few times, your ass is just dead. You die very quickly to firearms, and you don't regenerate health in this game at all. You have to find items, and I think that's pretty cool actually. You can also interact with the environment quite a lot. You can pick up just random shit, guitars, sledgehammers, really anything Indy can wield. You can use that as a melee attack and usually knock people out. All in all, I found the combat to be not only incredibly satisfying, but actually just really fun. But what's really cool is you don't have to just run in and start throwing haymakers left and right. You actually can be stealthy. There are several areas where the game very much encourages you to be stealthy. And the stealth in this game, it's actually alright. Yeah, it is a bit basic, but it's very functional, it works, and yeah, it's actually kind of fun. And this is where the game feels more like an immersive sim. Yeah, you can run into this area and start fighting everybody, but you can also be stealthy, sneak around, go through the environment. You can even use the whip and platform, and you might have an easier time. There's even some objectives that you can complete in different ways, and I just think that's really cool. Now, I've briefly touched upon it, but I want to give a special shout out to the whip. The whip is just perfect in this game. It is like the best whip of any video game. Not only does it sound and feel amazing, but it has a lot of utility, not just in the combat, but for the platforming as well. Man, I love the freaking whip in this game. Alright, but outside of that, something that really impressed me was the side content. In most games, optional content, it's optional for a reason, but in Indiana Jones and the Great Circle, the optional content is usually just as good as the main content. While not every single optional objective is absolutely amazing, a majority of them are actually really great, complete with their own characters, set pieces, moments, puzzles. Like, they really do feel like main missions here, and they're just as good as the main missions. And sometimes even the more basic side quests actually become full-fledged side missions where there's a lot more to them, and you actually get handsomely rewarded as well. The game really rewards curiosity and exploration, not only giving you more money, but you also get these little books that you can upgrade Indiana with, and there's actually collectibles that are worth getting. I was thoroughly impressed with the side content, and I wanted to do as much of it as I possibly could, and because of that, it took me quite a while to beat this game. It was much longer than I thought it would be, taking well past the 20-hour mark, and I can't imagine anybody beating this game in under like 15 hours, which is, yeah, longer than really all of Machine Games' other games combined. And it's all quality. The pacing is really great. I was thoroughly engaged throughout the entire time, and I just really liked it. The last thing I'll bring up is the presentation. This is a great looking game. Not only do the environments look really nice, the character models are great, Indiana looks awesome, and then the voice acting, it's really good stuff. While at times you can kinda tell that it's not Harrison Ford as Indiana, for the most part, I think it's really great, and it certainly feels like Indiana. The game has a great sense of humor. It's got good music, and it really just feels like Indiana Jones. It feels way more like Indiana Jones than those last two movies did, that's for sure. It's pretty obvious at this point, but I absolutely recommend the game. It has a great story, the characters are great, Indiana's amazing, it looks great, it's incredibly fun to play, it's satisfying, the puzzles are thoughtful, the side content is exceptional for side content, and it's got plenty of fan service. It really was amazing. And then we have what I believe to be the best Bethesda game of the 2020s, Doom Eternal. The game released in 2020, and I very much remember that day. It was the same day Animal Crossing came out, and while we might have been in quarantine, we were certainly eating good because this game, oh, this is the good shit. So it is a sequel to the 2016 game. It sees the Doomslayer trying to end Hell's consumption of Earth. Yes, it is literally hell on Earth like Doom 2. And the Doomslayer really just has to save everybody. The story is a bit more prevalent than Doom 2016, but it's actually pretty good. But I'll also say it doesn't really ever get in the way of the gameplay. You can kind of just ignore it all if you want to, but there's a ton of story and characters and world and lore if you want to learn more about Doom and everything Doom related, and I think it's really cool stuff. It's cool how much effort was really put into the lore and the world, and this game just has a ton of funny moments to it where the Slayer just shows everyone that, yeah, they are the shit. I like the story, I like where everything goes, and I think it's pretty cool how you can learn a bunch about the Doom world. When it comes to the gameplay, yeah, they took Doom 2016 and really just put it on crack. This game is way faster than Doom 2016. And I think the best way to describe it is that it's just fucking nuts. Like, it's one of the fastest video games I've ever played. Everything moves at a blistering speed in this game. Your character moves hella fast, you can do this little shift, which you can even do in the air. The enemies move fast, your projectiles are fast, the glory kills are even faster than ever. This game just has this crazy fast tempo to it, and it really never lets up. It only gets faster and faster the more you play this game. So if you're someone with pretty slow reflexes, or you're like me who has the reflexes of like a 43-year-old meth head, this game will really whip you into shape. It's also quite a bit more challenging than the 2016 game, mostly due to the speed. If you're standing still, you might as well just be fucking dead. But anyway, the moment-to-moment gameplay is a blisteringly fast first-person shooter where you basically just annihilate everything that moves. Like, all of the weapons returned from the prior game. You even get a few new weapons, and you can just absolutely slaughter everything with these. All of the weapons are great. And even some of the returning weapons are a bit different. Like, the shotgun has a grappling hook attached to it, and I'm sorry, this will just never not get old. Like, I don't know who thought of this, but this was just an amazing idea, and it's so much fun to use. You also get like this flamethrower known as the flame belch that you can shoot out at times. There's grenades and bombs. And of course, a bunch of glory kills and executions. There's tons of new executions here, and they're just as satisfying as the prior game. Speaking of what you'll actually be executing, there is way more demons than the prior game. There's actually almost twice as many enemies out here. They all have different tactics, and some of them can absolutely rock your shit. When it comes to this game's weapon and enemy roster, it is so good. It's like this sandbox where you have all these weapons and options to kill just so many different enemies, and it really makes almost every encounter feel fresh, varied, and different from the last. Even when you're replaying the same encounter over and over, it feels different like every single time. There's just so many different ways to go about maiming everything that it never gets old. It's immensely satisfying when it comes to the combat. The combat loop might be the best of any modern first-person shooter. It is unbelievably good. There's all this new movement tech as well, where you can do the dashes to help add to the speed and get out of tight situations. There's wall climbing. You can even swing from these bars. Like, you could just fly all over the damn place. It gets so frantic and crazy, and again, it's just so much fun. When you're not in combat, there's actually a bit of exploration and a good amount of platforming. Thanks to the new movement tech, there's actually a decent amount of platforming that is here, and while some people don't like it, I actually quite do. I think it adds to the variety, it breaks things up nicely, and I never found it all that obnoxious or intrusive, and it never goes on that long. It's maybe a few minutes at most, and then you're back to killing things, and it's just as fun as ever. I don't mind the platforming. I know some people also don't like the speed and feel of the combat, thinking it's less like the older Dooms in 2016 and more like this just cracked out first-person shooter that goes nuts, but I just could not get enough of the combat loop in this game. Like, inject that shit into me all day, fam. I just wanted more and more of this combat. I find myself coming back to this game just to do more ripping and tearing and more of the combat. It's just so much fun. I can only say it so many times, but like, it's just so much fun. And then of course there's a little bit of exploration. There are some secrets to find, but you'll find yourself wanting to replay these levels a bunch. The level design is pretty good. The game's got a good length to it. The pacing is very good. And I found myself thoroughly engaged the entire time. There wasn't a dull moment to this game. Even when you're in the Fortress of Doom, the new hub area where you can like upgrade your gear and look at some of the stuff you've collected and of course choose older missions. I actually think this is pretty cool and it's a good hub area. When it comes to the presentation, I mean, just look at it. It looks fantastic. It looks even better than the 2016 game. The demons look great. They look really great when they get ripped apart. This is a gory, violent game, and yeah, it just looks really good. The humans look good. The environments and lighting are absolutely killer, and then the soundtrack is just goated. It's one of the best soundtracks to any video game ever. I love the soundtrack to Doom Eternal. It is crazy good. Like, I just want to listen to some of it right now, honestly. It is that good. I love the soundtrack to this game. I love basically everything about Doom Eternal. It's one of the greatest first-person shooters ever made, and it shows that Doom really is the king of first-person shooters. It is the big kahuna. It's like at the top of the mountain. It's so good. If you have not tried it at this point, and you even kind of like first-person shooters, I think you should give Doom Eternal a shot. I think you're going to enjoy it. I mean, I'm sure there are plenty of people that don't enjoy Doom Eternal or don't love it as much as certain other Doom games, but we can all agree that it's still a pretty fun time, right? And then there's the DLC, The Ancient Gods Part 1 and 2, and this is some of the best DLC for like any FPS. The first episode is actually really difficult, like shockingly difficult. The second episode is a bit more balanced, and I like the second one a bit more, but this DLC, oh, it's also very good. Look, I've been gushing about Doom Eternal for several minutes now. It's pretty obvious how I feel about it. I think everybody should go try it at some point. It's such a good time. But yeah, that's it for today's video. Despite me only talking about 7 games, somehow I almost went for an entire hour. I just had a lot to say about a lot of these games. So I hope you all enjoyed it. I'll be talking about more Bethesda games in 2025. I can't wait for Doom the Dark Ages. Man, that shit looks so good. If you made it to this part of the video, you can comment Redfall. Yeah, Redfall's gonna be the code word. I'd love to see how creative some people get with that. You'll get a heart from me if you mention Redfall. So with that, hope everyone has a wonderful rest of the day. Stay safe, y'all.